Hi and welcome into the most comprehensive chess opening guide. You're about to learn all the chess opening principles that you need to follow in any opening that you play and in every game that you play. Okay, let's start off with the most trivial one, occupy the center with pawns. You've probably heard about this one. We're gonna go gradually to more advanced levels. Anyway, let's start with the most fundamental principles because you still need to know them. And also you gotta understand why it is so. So after e4, let's say black allows you to grab the center with pawns. Now, why do you want to do that? Well, let's imagine that black just develops pieces without caring about the center. What's going to happen next? Let's look at this position. We occupy 2 of the 4 central squares with our pawns, and these 2 pawns also control a whole lot of squares in the middle of the board, making it very hard for your opponent to move around. Like, these pieces just can't go forward at all. Moreover, anytime in the future, you can push your pawn forward and kick this knight away. And same thing happens to the other knight. If it ever brought forward, you can play e5 and kick it back. Now, it can't go forward, meaning making it very uncomfortable for black to move around. Now, in contrast to this, let's look at the white position. Now, for white, it's very comfortable to develop your pieces however you like. You can develop your bishop anywhere along this diagonal, this bishop anywhere along this diagonal. Your queen can easily move around these squares, while for the black, it's all completely stuck there. So all in all, control in the center just allows you to control the majority of the chessboard, making it much easier for you to play. Besides occupying the center with pawns, you do want to develop your minor pieces, knights and bishops, towards the center, towards the same central area of the board. Therefore, in most cases, your knights are going to be developed this way, and after that, you're also going to develop your bishops somewhere towards the center. Now, generally speaking, pieces in the center of the board are just stronger. For example, look at this bishop. It controls 2 long diagonals, and look at the black light square bishop. It controls only its own breathing if it meditates, but besides that, it can't do anything. Now, look at this knight on f3. It controls 8 squares around. If we count it, it's 8. And this knight on h6 only controls 4. Therefore, if we can compare the white knight and the white knight is actually 2 times stronger. And that's the reason behind developing your pieces towards the center. We're moving on to the next principle, knights before bishops. And I do understand that, known as a big proponent of the bishop's opening, you'll be like, Igor, do you want to keep us off your favorite opening? Yeah, you're right, so let's not talk about it too much and move on. Now, seriously, there are 2 primary reasons for you to develop your knights before bishops. Bishops are already fairly active from their starting position, while the knight is totally passive. That's the reason number 1. And number 2 is bishops are more flexible. As for the knight, we're pretty sure that it's going to go there. While for the bishop, we may not be completely sure which square is the best for the bishop. Therefore, we may start from the move which we know we're going to play anyway, and then decide which move to play next, depending on the circumstances. For example, here, let's say we trade, black goes bishop g7, and now, as they hit this knight on d4, we think, okay, now let's develop our dark square bishop. We need to develop it anyway, but now we can develop it right here, so that we also guard the knight on d4. You can see that depending on the circumstances, we can decide where to develop our bishops. For example, if black ever goes d6, we may think, oh, now this knight is a little bit more vulnerable. Maybe we want to go there and attack it. Well, if he does not play d6, maybe you can decide, okay, let me put it here and put pressure down this diagonal. Let me remind you real quick that it is the final chance to take advantage of the special offers in honor of the International Father's Day. And you can get a massive discount up to 75% off on any of my premium courses. On top of that, 5 lucky winners are going to get the collection of all the premium courses I've ever created for free. Again, you can get to know the details below. And if you want to achieve any chess goals, whatever they are, we've got students who achieved 2000 rating level, won local tournaments, state championships, world amateur championships, international master norms, grandmaster norms, you name it. Again, we know how to help you, and I'll be happy to do that. Here comes the next principle, develop your knights to the central squares of the 3rd rank, or the 6th rank if you're playing black. Now, although this may seem common sense, but in reality, quite often I've seen players developing their knight somewhere to e7, and they justify it somehow. And I know we human beings are very creative creatures. You know, we take a break from the internet on our computer to check out the internet on our phone, and we can justify that. But let's not overcomplicate matters. You need to develop your knights to the central squares of the 3rd rank or the 6th rank if you're playing black. It's very simple. Your knights are the most active there. So let's not overcomplicate matters. Now from f6, this knight is going to put pressure here, support this square, you're ready to jump to g4 in some variations. All in all, the knight is really active here. If you instead put it to h6 or to e7, it's going to be less active. And therefore, you should only do that if for some reason this square is totally unavailable. Let's say if there were somehow your opponent's pawn right here on e5 and it takes away this square and there's nothing you can do, then maybe you have to develop your knight other ways. But if not, just develop it to the central squares. Castle early, preferably within the first 5 to 10 moves of the game. In this position, it was black to play, and they delayed their castling and instead developed their knight to d7. Now, the move that seemed to make a lot of sense, especially to those who didn't watch this video and didn't know that the knight should be developed here. Anyway, it looks like black develops a knight and maybe prepares some sort of central advancements after that, but the reality is, as long as your king stands in the middle of the board, it is in danger. And in this position, white took advantage of this opportunity straight away. They played e5 to break open the center. After they strayed, the knight needs to go somewhere. The knight got here, and now white won the game with a little tactics. Bishop takes f7, calling the king out. After that, white followed up with knight to g5. That is a check to the king, and also a discovered attack of the knight. But that's not even worse. If the king moves here or here, black is going to actually lose due to knight to d into e6, attacking these squares, and black is lost mainly due to his queen being captured. In the game, black instead decided to play here, king to g8, but now white followed up with queen to d5 check, finishing the game just within a few moves. So far we talked about the right things to do, but let's also talk about the don'ts, those common errors that people make. One of them is do not trade your bishop for your opponent's knight for no good reason. Quite often I see players play something like this, bishop g4, and then, if challenged, they simply think that, okay, the easiest way to deal with this threat is just to trade it off. And you should not do this. Generally speaking, a bishop is a little bit stronger than a knight. And again, there is no reason to trade it off. Also, while trading, you help your opponent to bring the queen out, and you lose some time without any gain just by helping your opponent to develop. So you really make your position inferior. Right now, white is attacking this pawn on f7, black needs to cover, and one more disadvantage of trading off your bishop is that after that, all the squares of that light color are becoming more vulnerable to your opponent's attack. White can play queen b3 now, hitting this pawn as well as this pawn on b7, and in fact black is already lost. For example, if they try to defend this pawn on f7, they're going to lose this one, and this rook on a8 is hanging. If they try to defend it this way, white can play bishop b5, pinning the queen and winning it. Notice that it is not a coincidence that black has all these troubles all along the white squares. By the way, even queen c8 sneaky check could be possible. All these light squares are weak due to the fact that black traded off their light square bishop for no good reason. The next principle is do not develop your queen too early. In this position, white played d4, which is generally speaking a move in the right direction. White wants to occupy the center. However, the downside is that after this exchange, they did develop their queen too early. This allows black to bring their minor pieces into the game with tempos while attacking the queen. The queen went back, black continued with knight e5 attacking the bishop. After he goes back, black could play knight g4 and win another tempo that way, but they found another interesting way, bishop b4, checking the king, and after that the bishop all of a sudden slided back, attacking the queen once again. Now it turns out that white cannot take the bishop because of this royal fork. In the game, white noticed this and played queen g3, but that failed to a brilliant bishop takes f2. The bishop can be taken two different ways, but either way, they're going to fall under one or the other fork. The next one is something you might have heard of: do not move the same piece twice in an opening. In this position, black played the knight for the second time in a row, knight to d4, hoping for this opening trap, queen to g5, with pretty strong counterplay for black. But the problem with this move is that the rest of the pieces of black feel ignored, and they're gonna carry on this psychological trauma for the rest of their life. Now, a bit serious, of course, horsing around with a knight that is already developed does not change things too much, while instead, if black just brought one of the other pieces into the game, that would increase the firepower of their position significantly. Back to the game after knight d4, white simply ignored it. Now black has to deal with this threat. They had to trade. Now look at this, white already has 3 useful moves made, while black is still completely inactive. And after knight f6, white took advantage of this by starting to attack the center, e5. Now this knight is attacked, but it can't go away because of queen takes f7 mate, and white has already won the game. Do not open the center when you are behind in development. In this position, it is black to play, and it is risky for black to capture this pawn on e4, because it opens up these central files, while black is for the most part undeveloped. Therefore, it is risky for black to initiate in this battle. Now, to be exactly precise, knight takes c4 in this particular case, although risky, but it's a decent move to play. It was popularized by Kramnik a while ago, and it's crazy to think about it, but if Kramnik popularized it nowadays, we could accuse him of cheating, because knight takes c4 is the move suggested by Stockfish. Anyway, with precise play, black can hold the position, but fundamentally there is a risk. For instance, white goes rook e1, hitting the knight, and it has to go back. After this, white can capture this pawn on e5. Black trades, rook takes e5 counts with this check. Black needs to cover, now white goes knight c3, and here knight takes b5. This natural move actually turns out to be a fatal mistake, because now we go knight d5, taking full advantage of the centralized king in an open position. Now we threaten to capture the bishop, it can't move because it's pinned, and black tries to escape with castling. We take on e7, check. The king has to move. Now queen h5 is a beautiful way to finish the game. We create this beautiful threat of queen takes h7 followed by rook h5 mate. But even if black noticed the threat, it's not easy to stop it, because if instead they try g6, we still go inside with queen h6, and after that we still play rook h5. This time we just sacrifice the rook, threatening mate, but after that there is this sneaky queen to f6 checkmate. And the final daunt: do not use the Alekhine's gun without a license. Just kidding, I'm okay with this one. Now the final daunt is: do not move the flank pawns without a good reason. Now, you will notice that in most of the openings, we do move our central pawns forward. The e-pawn and the d-pawn. Occupying the center is great. Quite often, we also move the c-pawn, because from here, we also reinforce our control over the central squares. Now, when it comes to the f-pawn on the other side of the board, we gotta think twice before moving it, because although it could also reinforce our central control, but there is an obvious downside, is that it actually exposes our king, making it vulnerable to some sort of attacks along this diagonal, and sometimes it can get dangerous. Therefore, with the f-pawn, you gotta think twice before moving it. But when it comes to the flank pawns, those pawns on the left side and on the right side of the board, quite often moving them just makes no sense and is simply a waste of time. Like, yeah, you could move the g-pawn to develop your bishop, but it's just easier to simply develop your bishop in one move along this diagonal. Same with these moves, pawn to h3 or a3. Quite often they're really unnecessary, because even if your opponent at some point brings their knight or bishop to g4, that's not really dangerous. You can kick it off later, and therefore there is no need to defend up front and waste time doing so. Therefore, always be very careful and think twice before moving these pawns on the left or on the right side of the board. Quite often it's just a waste of time. Let's say you did everything right, you occupied the center with pawns, you developed your minor pieces, after this you castled. What are you going to do next? The next principle suggests that you should develop your queen, usually to the central squares of the second rank. Therefore, you want to move your queen somewhere here. These are usually safe squares for the queen, while at the same time you still take part into the game. For example, if we move the queen right here, then the queen is safe, there's no way for your opponent to attack it, but at the same time it can support our advancement in the center with pawn to e4, or maybe we can trade on d5 and play bishop a6 and trade off this bishop. All in all, our queen actively involves into the game. Now, why don't you want to bring your queen to a more advanced position? Well, if you do so, if you play it somewhere here, you possibly expose it to potential attacks from your opponent. Let's say black can trade here and then play a6 and b5, and this queen can become in danger. That is why usually you want to put it to the central squares of the second rank. The next principle is complementary to the previous one, but nevertheless it makes sense to keep it in mind. You gotta connect your rooks. Meaning you need to clear the 8th rank so that there is nothing that stands in between of your rooks. So here we do want to develop our queen. And yes, it reinforces the previous principle. We do want to bring our queen usually to the central squares of the second rank. But besides that, we're also connecting the rooks, making it very comfortable for us, because next you can move either of your rooks to any square of the last rank, which is very convenient because you can decide the best position for your rook depending on the circumstances. In this particular position, probably black would wish to bring the rook somewhere here so that both rooks stand on semi-open files and put pressure down these files. And now here are a couple a little bit more advanced and additional ideas which are still useful to know. Now, looking at this position, it is black to play, and classical rules suggest that you should occupy the center with pawns and play pawn to d5. If you don't do this, your opponent will occupy the center himself and you'll be in trouble. However, Nimzovich came up with the idea that you don't have to necessarily put your pawns in the middle of the board as long as you control the center with your pieces. And therefore, apart from the move pawn to d5, which is a perfectly fine move to play, you can alternatively play bishop b4, and now you influence the center, you control the center with your pieces. This bishop pins the knight, therefore the knight no longer controls these squares, making it impossible for white to play e4. They can't do this, you would just grab this pawn and win it. Therefore they can't occupy the center, and you did it without putting your own pawn there. Plus, on the next move, you can also reinforce the same idea and bring your bishop right here, and you will also have a really strong control over all these central squares, but you do this with your pieces, not with pawns, and that is also fine. Another advanced principle suggests that you may let your opponent grab the center as long as you are ready to attack it vigorously. In this position, black goes for the Grunfeld defense, pawn d5. And at first, it looks like white obtained that perfect pawn center, which is rock solid, and looks like black should be in trouble. But it's not the case as long as black attacks the center vigorously right on the next moves. So black can play c5, bishop g7, and put hard pressure onto the white center, and that allows black to stay in the game. Again, let me reinforce that idea. This pawn center is only okay for black as long as you attack it straight away. If black played anything else, let's say b6 and bishop b7, then it would indeed be neglecting the center and white would have a strong advantage here. But as long as black is ready to attack the center straight away, let's say we put pressure with our pawn, then we add the bishop, then we add the knight to the same attack, and then possibly bishop g4 to pin the knight, maybe queen a5 to attack this pawn. As long as we counterattack vigorously, that is fine. And last but not the least, when dealing with hasty attacks, counter-strike in the center. Now, that's one of the troublesome situations, when your opponent plays something unusual, something you don't know, don't expect, and they start attacking you. And then it quite often feels uncomfortable. Say you take, they go e5, now you gotta move your knight somewhere. And if you just let your opponent to continue his attack, you can get in trouble pretty easily. Like if you move your knight somewhere here, he can indeed grab the pawn, attack your knight, and maybe black is already lost here. Now let's take it back. Instead, what you want to do is to counter-strike in the middle of the board. Black can play pawn d5, and that counter-attacks the bishop and does not let your opponent to just keep expanding and keep attacking you. You seize the initiative, and now things are totally fine. If he takes here, you take the bishop, you're great. Now, let's take it back. Let's imagine some other scenario. Let's say white attacks you with the pawn f4 move, and again, you don't know the theory. Now, the beauty of these opening principles is that they are universal rules. They work in any opening. So again, you don't know what to do, you think, oh, I got a counter-strike in the center of the board, and you play pawn d5, and now you're perfectly fine. You counter-strike here, here, and now white has to worry about his position. If he takes, you recapture with a knight, and now this pawn is hanging. What can they do? If they take here on e5, that's actually going to be a blunder to this double attack, and they lose the game straight away. If instead they take here on d5, you recapture, now you attack this pawn on g2, this pawn on f4, maybe you want to go queen e4, check to the king, and all in all your position is great. That's how you very quickly and easily refuted your opponent's hasty attack. Congratulations, now you know all the opening principles. And if you want me to help you to level up in chess, please don't forget that the special offers in honor of the Father's Day are going to expire tomorrow, so if you're interested, it's better to take advantage of this right now. Either way, have a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.